Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, the best accredited chamber in the country, I must say, a very warm welcome to you, our virtual audience, and to our panelists. Today, we will be discussing menopause in the workplace as part of the Chamber's series of mental health webinars aligned with our mental wellbeing charter. Thanks to all of you for so many great questions. We will endeavour to answer during our Q&A session. We've got an extra long Q&A session, which I'm really looking forward to. Please continue to ask any further questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box. Without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to the very capable Amantha King, who will take it from here. Over to you, Amantha.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. I'm just so delighted to be your facilitator today. My name is Amantha King. I'm a menopause coach and I'm a strengths performance coach. If you want to know more about any of our panelists, you can check those out on the website. But thank you, David. It's a huge privilege for me to be working with Thames Valley Chamber, an organisation that truly does value women in the workplace. And I am going to be joined today by our fantastic guest speaker, Teresa Winters from Santander, and my other amazing colleague, Andrew Thurman-Pickett from PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I'm not going to waste any time. I've been given 5 minutes to set the scene today. So thank you for being here. So let's get going, shall we? Let's talk about how we make menopause really matter in the workplace and make it part of our culture. I'm going to hit you with some figures, and this is being recorded so you can look back over this later. We know on average that 1 million women have already left the UK workplace due to perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. Many of you will be aware that the second latest Davina McCall documentary actually used very compelling large-scale data, which was provided by the Fawcett Society, looking at menopause in the workplace. And it looked at about 4,000 perimenopausal and menopausal women. Bear with me, I'm going to give you some facts, but I think this totally underlines why we're here today, why we're having this conversation. And the word I'd like to leave with you throughout this presentation is journey. Often an overused word, often seen on lots of reality programs, but the reality is menopause is a journey that every single woman on the planet will take. And you may have symptoms, you may not have symptoms, but this directly affects 51% of the population, but indirectly affects probably about 100% of us, because we will all know someone who is navigating this transition and this journey in life. So coming back to the Fawcett report was commissioned by Channel 4. The Waits Group actually sponsored it. As I say, it looked at 4,000 women. So here are the figures. 77% found that they had at least one symptom which was very, very difficult to navigate and work through at work. 44% had 3 or more symptoms that were classed as severe. When we think, I said this statistic last time, that on average, a woman going through menopause will have at least 8 symptoms that she probably hasn't realised are all connected to the perimenopause part of the menopause journey. 84% said sleep was the biggest issue, 73% said brain fog was the biggest issue, and 69% said they had anxiety or depression. This is a huge workplace culture issue. Women are struggling to stay productive in their roles. Women want to be at work. I'm one of those women. I was perimenopausal for 14 years. I could not have been at work the way I was. But what I want you to know is this is a story, a journey of hope, because people like me, perimenopausal women, are successful. I've set up 2 businesses during this time, and I know there are women out there who want to be at work, who need to be at work, who will deliver exceptional work for you because they always have done. They just need a bit of support. So when we look at the workplace practice specifically, I want to just give you some figures. But before I do, we've got a poll that we want to run. So David, are you able to run the first poll for me, which is asking the question: What percentage of employees do you think have access to basic menopause support in the workplace? So you should see the poll there. We're going to give you literally about 30 seconds to complete that. So can you answer the question, what percentage of employees do you think have access to basic menopause support in the workplace? So whilst you're doing that, it's probably a really difficult one to answer, and you may be answering from your own viewpoint, or you may be answering from what you saw on the documentary, because this question was actually answered in the documentary. So just a few more seconds, and I'm going to ask David if we have the results in of that poll, David. So really interestingly there, overwhelmingly, the 73% of you have said 20%, and you are absolutely right. Only 20% of all organisations out of those 4,000 women that were polled have a basic menopause support policy or guidance in their workplace. So that totally underlines why we're here today. So thank you for answering that. We've got a few more polls coming up to keep this lovely and interactive. So let me give you just a few more bits of information before we crack on and introduce my guest. So looking at that workplace, we know that 80% said they didn't have menopause support. 79% said there was no support networks actually existing in the business. There was nowhere to have a conversation about menopause, no menopause support cafes, places to reach out within their business. 81% there were no adjusted absence policies. And I know Teresa and I are going to talk about this. What can you do to adjust your policies around reporting of absence? 79% there was no information sharing with staff. And the point here is this is no longer a nice to do, it is a need to do. The government have been very, very clear. They do expect employers to support employees through this process. So the journey that we're all taking today starts with a single step. But a journey is not a journey unless you take another step. And having done one webinar already, I am delighted to say that a number of organisations have started this process. We felt it was really important to get someone with experience that has done this process, been through all the hard points, been through all the boundaries, overcome them, and is now considered to be an award-winning role model for menopause support in the workplace. So without further ado, thank you for answering that poll. I would like to just ask a second poll, if that's okay, again, to just sensitise ourselves to why this is so important. So David, would you please run the second poll? And the second poll is asking our audience, what is your biggest challenge to get the importance of menopause at work on the cultural agenda? And you'll see that on your screens now. So again, just 30 seconds to just pick your answers in terms of what is the biggest challenge to get the importance of menopause at work on the cultural agenda. Okay, a few more seconds and then we'll ask David to give the results. Thank you, David. Do you have the results for us? Okay, amazingly. So when we look in terms of the priority here, lack of understanding or education on the topic of menopause is 62%. 44 out of 71 of you have actually picked that as the top reason or the challenge of getting menopause to be important at work. Secondly, we actually have stigma, and we know that this is a really big problem. Not everyone wants to talk about menopause. There is a fear attached with talking about it, a loss of status, a loss of potential for promotion. Thirdly, we have senior management coming in at 15%. So 11 out of 71 of you are concerned that actually senior management, and actually finally 2 out of 71, which represents 3%, have said that HR is the biggest challenge. So I think that's a really fantastic place to start and to introduce my amazing guest that Thames Valley have invited, which is Teresa Winters. Hi, Teresa, how are you?
Good morning, Amantha. I'm really good, thank you. Great to see you, and good morning, everybody.
So let's embrace this opportunity we have. Let me just tell you a little bit about Teresa. Teresa is the Senior HR Manager, Employee Experience Proposition at Santander. And Teresa and I met on LinkedIn. It's probably more than a year ago, just exchanging stuff on posts. But this is a great story. And what we'd like to say from the outset, this is something that relates to all businesses, whatever size you are. You might have 3 employees in your business. It might be 2 of you, but there might be 2,000 or 20,000 of you. This model of what we're about to talk about is relevant to you, and we've really gone through all the questions that you've submitted, and we want to include as much of that information here. What we don't cover, we will cover after this webinar. So Teresa, I'm not going to waste any more of my time and maximize on your time, but let's get into it. So tell everyone what your role is at Santander, specifically in relation to the involvement around menopause. What is it you do?
Yeah, so I lead our support on menopause. So what does that mean? Well, it meant it was me for quite a long time. So we started our work in 2019 yeah, became a passion very, very quickly. It's not necessarily aligned totally to my day job, but my day job is providing a great employee experience. So in many ways, it couldn't be closer. But yeah, I think kind of that's really how I've been supporting it. I've got a team behind me now, which I can share a bit more about with that. But yeah, for a long time, it was kind of me starting out to really kind of talk a bit more about menopause in the organisation.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So why does someone suddenly decide to pick menopause as something to add on to their day job? Tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's strange because I'm just back from holiday. I was on holiday 3 years ago around a swimming pool, and I read a LinkedIn post, and to this day I'm mad that I didn't kind of keep that post and thank the person actually who did it. But it was
Oh, Teresa, we've lost you. You've gone on mute.
Yeah, I don't know why it went on mute. Is that better? I didn't do anything.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
So yeah, no, I read a post on LinkedIn around the swimming pool, which I know is a bit sad. I don't normally do those things. And this post said that the average age to reach menopause in the UK was 51, and I was exactly 51 at that time, and thought, you know, I haven't a clue whether I'm going through menopause or not a clue. So I did a post back on LinkedIn to say that I hoped that if the time came and I was going through symptoms, that my organisation I know would be there to support. And my director said, well, when you get back, let's talk about it. And that was my journey to start supporting menopause in the workplace.
Yeah, amazing, because it wasn't necessarily something you were experiencing, but I remember us talking, you said that lots of your girlfriends and colleagues, and you just sort of realised there was a lot more discussion about it. So because we want to really get into this, can you tell us about what the process was at Santander? Where did you start? And if you can, in that, what were the difficulties and challenges in sort of getting that going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where I started, I mean, I was very lucky when I came back from my leave. I had a chat with my director. We actually did have menopause guidelines in place on our intranet, but I don't think anybody would have known where to find them, to be honest. They were hidden, you know, in sort of somewhere behind other policies and documents. So at least we had something to start with. But what I did was I actually went to a business in a community event because I thought I need to understand more about menopause. So I went to a face-to-face event, a little bit like this, but with a smaller group of people that Business in the Community ran on menopause. I talked to other organisations. I found out more about menopause, and this was in the July, and I knew that World Menopause Day was coming up in the October, and I thought, what can I do between now and then to really start to understand menopause better in our organisation, and then maybe start the conversation and launch something around World Menopause Day. So that's what we did. So I spent a period of a few months from July to October finding out more about why we should be supporting menopause in the workplace. And I think that's really important, because if you don't understand what your colleagues feel and what your managers feel, then you are still making assumptions, even though there's lots of facts out there about menopause. So we did a survey of our colleagues to find out more about their experience around menopause in the workplace, how they felt about talking about it, whether they'd had absence, just a few simple questions, but it was overwhelming, the response that we had on that. And then pre-COVID, I actually went round to some of our sites, our head office sites, and held awareness sessions, really high level sessions, but held awareness sessions with colleagues. They were some of the most well attended lunch and learns that we've ever had. you can imagine in a contact centre environment, it's hard for people to get off phones, but I had over 100 people in a room in Bootle Contact Centre over lunchtime. They were so keen to talk about the topic, and that made me realise that was something we needed to do. So we took all of that rich information that was humbling and the survey data, and we decided to build a campaign around a communication to start for World Menopause Day that year.
Yeah, amazing. And I think what I've heard you say there, which is maybe something as a pointer for people watching, is that actually it's about not making assumptions. It's about knowing your numbers. You and I talk about this a bit, don't we, Teresa? It's about knowing your numbers. What is the scale of the issue in your organisation? And maybe something that we can help people with is perimenopause can pretty much start for people over the age of 35 onwards. So if you wanted to start anywhere, maybe take a look at some of your data sets and look at what is the size of this issue in your workplace, because actually for Asian women and Black women, menopause will come at 5 years earlier at 45. So it's really important to know what you're dealing with, and that's a really important point you make. So I know you're prepared to be really open with us. What were some of the difficulties and challenges, Teresa? What were the treacly bits that you had to get through?
Yeah, there were. I mean, I think, you know, from one perspective, I was very fortunate that I had some support from some senior leaders in HR to do the campaign. But that didn't mean that there weren't questions from people around why we were doing that, and, you know, why we weren't focusing on other things that people perhaps felt were more important. And I think I told myself that constantly, that was because people didn't understand the facts around menopause. You know, so we had challenges from people saying that, why are we not talking more about, you know, certain types of cancer, for example, in our internet communications? Why are we not? And we talk about a lot of things as a big employer to support our colleagues. But I think that until you realise, as you said, that half the population are impacted directly, the majority of the population are impacted in some way, shape or form, people don't appreciate, I think, the importance of talking about it. I had colleagues in my own HR team, male colleagues, who didn't understand and were challenging why we were talking about that. One colleague asked me, wasn't the menopause a myth? You know, and that was an interesting conversation. You know, so we had some of that. I think the biggest challenge really was knowing where to start in a big organisation, and recognising that if you're going to start the conversation, and I would say this doesn't matter how big you are actually, but if you're going to start the conversation, you need to have some forward thinking around how you're going to maintain it. You know, the last thing I wanted to do was share these survey results and talk about how important menopause was and share the facts, and then 6 months down the line nobody had heard anything. You know, so I think the biggest challenge to me was, it's great I've got the support to start this, but how do I continue this? How do I, and to your point, I started to build the facts, you know, the data around my survey, the facts around our population, our managers, and that's how I started to kind of challenge people's thinking around, why is this a topic that we need to sort of spend a lot of time talking about?
Yeah, brilliant. If you had to say what was one of the watch out things, or be cautious, be amber about something, what would you say in that first stage is the thing to just be a watch out for people?
Yeah, the biggest one, by far, I would say from day one, is be inclusive. Whenever you talk about menopause, it is not a women-only, age-related, time of life topic. It's truly a workplace topic. So as soon as you start talking about it, you know, yes, it's fine to say every woman goes through menopause, but what you need to be doing is talking about the fact that it impacts us as a whole, as an organisation, and this is why, that it impacts trans colleagues going through the transgender process. You know, they can go through hormones. Talk about, you know, male menopause, which we can come on to if people have questions, but make it inclusive, because the moment you make people feel it's a women-only time of life topic, then you switch off a huge proportion of your workforce, and wrongly, you know, and that would be such a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pinpoint that point even further, is whenever I do webinars for corporate businesses, men literally will message and they'll say, my wife is going through this. Yep. I'm not sleeping, she's not sleeping. And so I think that's so important. We must have that compassionate element and not be assumptive. We must embrace and invite everybody, because this is knowledge, and knowledge is power. So the more we can share that, I think we help not just directly our employees, but much further afield. We impact much further afield. That's brilliant, Teresa. So I know that a number of people have written in on the questions, and as our poll suggested, it's about yes, the awareness is important, but how do we actually get people on board? Because do we have a lot of eye rolling? And I can say this in my position without fear of judgment, but I see a lot of eye rolling. I'm like, oh, here we go again. Is this like mental health part 2? And I see that in the leadership section. So how do we call that out? How do you get high level support from your leaders, Teresa? Because I know that is something you had to deal with.
Yeah, and it is a really important question, and I think I grappled for a while when we were looking at the menopause support about, well, where does it fit in terms of, we're a big organisation, and I'm super proud of what we do around sort of supporting employees to thrive, but actually where does this sit so people don't feel like it's just a topic sitting out here that we're talking about? So we decided right from day one that we would sit it at the heart of our wellbeing strategy for colleagues. So, it doesn't matter whether you sit it as part of your D&I strategy, however small you are, whatever you talk about, whether it's helping your colleagues to be their best, it doesn't matter where you sit, but be clear that it sits within an overarching principle of your organisation. Yeah, because I think that then means that whenever you come to talk about it, it's part and parcel of that. So for us, whenever we talk about menopause, it's about mental health and well-being, and it's and physical health and well-being. It's about supporting you to be, to be at your best and to thrive, not survive. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that actually then helps you. So whenever I was being questioned or challenged, one of the things I constantly talk about with menopause is that I think that with managers, and we're talking about it in the organisation, it's very much like mental health was 2 or 3 years ago. We've gone through a pandemic which has seen a massive sea change in organisations understanding the benefits of caring for the individual as a whole. It's always been the whole person that's come to the workplace. It's taken us a while to catch up as organisations that actually we therefore should know the whole person and support. And certainly employees want that now. Their expectations are higher and higher as a result. So I think that this is the same. And so whenever we're talking about menopause, we don't expect managers to be experts. We don't expect them to be psychologists for mental health. We don't expect them to be experts in menopause. What we want is for them to have a good conversation with somebody about it if they have to talk about it, or somebody raises it with them, and they can signpost them to the right support that's available. And menopause is exactly the same as mental health. People should feel comfortable being able to raise it if they want to, and then know where to get the support they need. And managers just need to be able to have a really good open conversation. And that's what we're trying to educate our managers to do.
Absolutely. And I love that, because it is about, you are not expected to be a subject matter expert, but we are. I mean, how would we react if someone said, actually, I'd just like to announce really happily that I'm pregnant? We'd know what processes to follow, wouldn't we, Teresa? We'd know how to deal with that. We'd know how to check in with people. This is not a big deal unless we feel disempowered because we don't have the knowledge. And
Absolutely.
So that awareness piece is so important, isn't it? So thank you for answering that. So we know that psychological safety is really important as an aspect of workplace culture, looking after people, certainly not adding or distressing employees in any way. What is it about menopause as a workplace culture that means it is really important when we consider psychological safety, in your opinion?
I think I think it has to start with, what's your approach to building psychological safety as an organisation anyway? If you're not focused on it, then menopause is a great place to start, but actually also you need to recognise that actually you can't necessarily get it around menopause if you haven't got it generally, or you're not trying to kind of foster that ability for people to speak up if they've got an idea, or raise a concern if something's not right. If you're not promoting that type of environment, then it's going to be a lot harder to potentially get people to do that from a health perspective, isn't it? So I think definitely a bit of a mirror up to say, what are we doing as an organisation to help people feel empowered to be able to speak up about anything, actually. And then with menopause, I think, and again, it doesn't matter whether you're small or large, actually, it's about trying to provide multiple ways for people to find the information and support they need. And I think the reason that's so important is that it actually doesn't matter how fantastic your culture is and how great your people managers are. Some women will never talk to their manager or their organisation about going through menopause because it's a deeply personal thing for some. Some will have no problem talking about it. So you can't expect, no matter how great you are, that people will do that. So what you need to do is provide channels of support. So whether that's great managers who are empowered and have training to have a good conversation, whether that's actually about a site, a website, or some leaflets that have information and external resources that people can go to. If you've got an occupational health team, empowering them with some knowledge and information to be able to support colleagues to go to. having a set of advocates, which I can talk about. We're a big organisation. We've got a group of advocates who know about menopause that people can reach out to. But you need to have multiple channels, and that's the most important thing, because not everyone's journey is the same, as you've said, and not everyone will want to approach it in the same way. The most important thing is they know where to find support they need when they can get it, when they need it.
Absolutely. Such a good point there, because we know although that 1 in 4 will have severe symptoms, the remaining 3 out of 4 will also have some degree of symptoms. And because this is a journey, I might be okay for a couple of years. The next 3 or 4 years could be absolutely hellish for me. I might come at it at a different approach if I know that those things are available. And it's a bit like the beat of the jungle, isn't it? It resonates the more you hear it. So that's really important. Now, let's talk about something that I know does concern people also, which is how do small, medium enterprises, smaller businesses create resources for people in menopause? I get this question a lot. Isn't that a really expensive thing to do, Amantha? I'm not sure we have the budget for it. What's your answer to that?
You can absolutely do things with no budget at all. I think the principles of how you can support menopause in the workplace are exactly the same no matter what size you are. The application might be slightly different, So if obviously as an organisation that's got multiple sites and 20,000 people for us across the organisation, one of my biggest challenges is actually raising awareness in an organisation of our size and getting people to know about menopause. But actually, you can do so many things. So, for example, if you don't currently have anything on menopause or even a policy of any kind, you can point your colleagues to external reputable resources straight away, from tomorrow, whether that's the British Menopause Society, whether that's the amazing Henpicked in the menopause in the workplace, the NICE guidelines, the CIPD, TUC have some fantastic support. There is a huge amount and wealth of very, very reputable information out there to help women and to help others going through menopause. So I think that's probably one of the biggest wins you could do. And we did that early on. We couldn't immediately create lots of information, but actually people knew where to then find that. So that's a really easy one you can do. I think if you're a small organisation and you're across maybe one or a few sites, you could do some awareness sessions like I did. Literally, I didn't go into detail. I talked about some of the facts that we know that you shared from the Fawcett report, some facts about menopause. I talked about when it can happen and what other pressures women can be going through. But you know what? The value in those sessions was the discussion. And I was so humbled by people who just sat there and said, I just thought it was me going through this, and getting together was just so powerful and didn't cost anything to do. So I think there are so many things like that you can do. You can find champions. When you start to talk about it, people that will come out of the woodwork, men and women. And the more you find champions, then you can get them to help you to talk about it more. And I think so there's lots of ways you can start. And even with a policy, we had guidelines. We still don't have a policy. We have guidelines in place. You can start to say, well, what do we want to do? How do we want to treat menopause? And how can we look at, for example, how we treat colleagues going through pregnancy? Do we want to look at doing that in the same way? And how can we actually detail that with menopause? And you can get free support externally to help you do your menopause guidelines. And other companies have published theirs to give you help as well, like Channel 4 and others.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great time to introduce the fact that we put together a resource for everybody attending this webinar. So there's a prize for turning up today. Not only do you get the recording, but we put exactly that together for you, because we both and all feel passionately that this is not about reinventing the wheel. There is stuff already out there. So we've put everything that Teresa has said on a resource that you're going to get straight after. So I'm hugely excited about that, because that's an easy win for you. And yes, absolutely, champions. I remember you saying to me, Teresa, now that you've got the champions on board, and it is an optional thing to do, and I would thoroughly recommend that you get women and men who are passionate about this topic talking about it, because they will be the biggest advocates for you. And whenever Teresa puts out a bulletin or something, they're beating the drum about it. So they're doing that work. So I think it might be quite a nice time to do another poll. What do we think? Poll number 3, absolutely. Shall we? David, would you be able to run poll number 3 for us, which is asking the question, what do you think is most important when embracing menopause at work into your company culture? Maybe consider some of the things that you've heard already. So there we go. That should be on your screens now. There are an option of 3 choices. So just take a few more seconds. Okay, lovely. Hope you all had a chance to cast your vote. David, do you have the results for us? I feel like a game show hostess. David, do you have the results? Okay, brilliant. The results are in. So number one, we have 72% education of the menopause and why it is important to embrace it into the culture of your company. Teresa, we've hit the nail on the head, which is fantastic. Secondly,
Absolutely.
menopause culture must be led from a senior level throughout the company. 16% of you have said that. And 12% have said put a menopause policy in place. So thank you for that, David. That's brilliant. So Teresa, that leads us nicely into the topic. It's probably the most asked question I get as a menopause consultant, which is, okay, Amantha, get the education piece, but should we actually be getting the menopause thing done first? Like, there almost seems a sense of panic to get a document ready because people are very aware about the growing number of employment tribunals, which are particularly finding in favour of the menopausal women that are bringing those tribunals forward. So what's your take on that in terms of chicken and egg? Do we need the guidance, then the policy? Or which way would you work it round, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, if I had my time over again, I probably would have looked at our guidelines again earlier. But because we had some in place, I decided to just kind of get on with the conversation, start the conversation and start to build some momentum around it. And actually, I have to say, it wasn't until about 18 months into the work we were doing that we started to relook at our policy and our guidelines and what do we want to do around that. I think that, you know, whether it's policy or guidelines, and yes, there is a debate in Parliament about whether organisations should have that, I think that it should start with, what do you want to say about how you will support menopause in the workplace? So I think that every organisation at some point should have that in place if you want to support menopause in the workplace. Whether it's guidelines or a policy, you know, personally at the moment, I don't think that necessarily matters. However, you know, there is a conversation, as we know, going on actively about organisations may need to have policies. So, but it's actually about, most importantly, it says what you want to believe, you believe as an organisation. We know that policies often are not seen as kind of, you know, not necessarily real, or they're there for a reason, they're there for those preventative times. Actually, it should talk about what's your belief around support for your employees around menopause. And the great news is, as I mentioned before, there's lots of guidance out there about the kinds of things you can include within policies and guidelines. So Hempit's Menopause in the Workplace gives some fantastic advice around that. The Channel 4 have provided their guidelines, so have Vodafone. We're going through finalising ours at the moment, but, you know, more than happy to share some of our thoughts. But it's actually around the things that you would expect it to be. It's, how should colleagues be supported in the workplace? What are the different types of adjustments that you might make? The biggest one, by the way, is flexible working, and then most of us are doing that already. And I think that, you know, one of the things that has always constantly amazed me, but a massive admiration for women going through severe symptoms, is that they don't want to be off work. They want to be in the workplace, and they just want, to your point, some adjustments to help them to be successful in the workplace. And very often that doesn't take a lot of adjustments. And now, as all working in a hybrid way, women can actually manage some of that better. Not everything, but they can manage some of those symptoms better. So I think it's about just having those conversations with the right people around, how do you want to treat menopause? And it can start as a page and a half with some great external links to provide people guidelines to, and then it can build out from there.
Absolutely. Perfect answer, because it's about what it represents. The document is not a fail-safe. It's about a representation of your culture. It's the thing that's going to attract people. If I was coming back into the workplace, the very first thing I'm going to Google is, what's your menopause policy? What's your menopause guidance? I want to know how you're going to treat women like me. And that's how we retain talent. That's how we directly impact our attrition rates. It's how we signal to the world we care. We make menopause matter in our culture, and this is how we do it. But it also is a nice set of open boundaries for people to operate within. It's comforting for managers, it's supportive for employees, it works for everybody, really. And again, in our resource that we've put together, I've put the Unison document, which is amazing. It really is amazing. But what I would just say is, and exert a word of caution, make it your own, make it represent your people. And if you're surveying people, survey men, women, the transgender community, survey everybody and make it representative of your people. So Teresa, we've got to zip along to the end, because I know there's going to be lots of questions coming up. So if you started again, in hindsight, you know, if we do a post-mortem on it, what would you do differently next time that would help our audience today?
I think that I would have tried to probably put more attention towards building those advocates earlier on, in terms of active advocates. So when I started to talk about menopause, and every time I talk about it now in communications, we always get people coming back positively with comments, which is fantastic. And I'm building that list of champions and active advocates. But I think in the early days, I kind of identified some of those, and maybe kind of, as we were trying to work through what we were working on, kind of put that to one side for the time being. Whereas actually what that prevented then was me being able to look at other information, because I was just on my own trying to do this. And when you're in a big organisation, but actually it doesn't really matter what size it is, getting somebody alongside you, whether it's 1 or 3 people, to really help you to drive that agenda really makes a massive difference. Because, you know, let's be clear, a lot of people, including myself at the time, who are working on menopause, are doing it as a side of desk activity in an organisation. Not everybody, and I'm no longer doing that anymore. It's part of my role. But actually, the more you can kind of get those supports, because there's loads of people out there that want to help you, and that by help you, that's about talking about it, that's about bringing ideas forward. So I think that I probably would open up more to more people, maybe have had more meetings to get some people together to talk about what could we do. We did some of that with our people networks. We're very lucky as a big organisation, we have 7 people networks, so I did engage them. But I think that, yeah, sooner would have been great, because it would have meant that I probably could have moved things forward quicker. But you know, I think one of my biggest sort of recommendations is it takes time. So be aware of that. Don't, you know, no matter how big or small you are, don't run before you can walk. It's about just starting that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Take that journey one step after the other. And the very last thing I want to ask you before we get into the question, if you were to give one really clear business advantage why leaders, organisations should actually roll up their sleeves, get totally behind this, what would it be, Teresa? What would be the reason as a business advantage for really embracing menopause and making it matter within your organisation?
I link it back to well-being. I mean, if I look at what our employees are now telling us, women of over 40 to 60, about whether we truly care about their well-being as an employer, whether they feel they can thrive in the workplace as a result of what we put in place. You know, the results are fantastic. You know, we are up 15 percentage points on that question around well-being, with women of 45 to 55 between 2019 and 2020, and we're about to run the next survey. Engagement, you know, women, and I've got over 700 colleagues going through support that we have, practical support for menopause, and they tell me that they are feeling better as a result. 9 out of 10 tell us they feel more better about us as an employer. So I think, you know, if you care about the health and well-being of your employees, because you know that actually they will thrive and do their best work in that environment, then menopause is no different. It will bring the same benefits. You know, it will add to that, and their commitment to you as an employer, you know, will just be through the roof as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the best place to leave this part of the conversation. Teresa, thank you so much for answering all those questions like a Gatling gun, going through them.
Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our esteemed colleague from PricewaterhouseCoopers, Andrew Thurman-Pickett. Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much. I know you've been monitoring the questions, so I'm going to hand over to you now to sort of take us through the questions. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, monitoring, trying to keep up with them. There are loads flying in, which is brilliant. So just to reiterate what I think David said at the beginning of the webinar, please, if you could use the Q&A function, I'm monitoring as they come through. We also have some pre-sent in ones, which are really good. But given time, I think let's get cracking. So the first, in a couple of the polls, the theme of education has come out a lot, right? And the fact that that's one of the biggest barriers. So I guess, Teresa, probably to start with you. So you mentioned some of the sessions that you ran internally. I guess going into some of the specifics of that, what have you found works best in terms of who should run it, what size of groups, you know, the importance of having, you know, a safe female-only space versus getting men involved, etc. Open question to you first.
Yeah, it's a great one as well. So I think, and I saw somebody asked a question in the chat about women versus men in sessions. And so I think when we started out, because we hadn't been talking about it, when I launched in World Menopause Day in 2019, I actually ran some sessions for women only, and I ran some for managers to talk about very similar sessions actually, but there was a session in the women's only where we flip chart you know, what they thought people were saying about menopause. And then on the male manager one, we shared some of the anonymous outputs of that and asked them what they could do as managers. But we got asked why had we done that from word go, and I think it was just because initially I wanted women to feel comfortable coming to a session, and I thought that was really important. But our overarching message was always about menopause being a workplace topic for both genders and all ages. So we did that. But since we did those sessions, every session I've ever advertised has been open to anyone who's interested in talking about menopause. So we've done somewhere, for example, we did a session around if you're supporting a loved one going through menopause, and that was open to colleagues supporting a loved one at home, but it was also open to relatives of colleagues or friends of colleagues outside of work to join as well if they were supporting a colleague. So we've done some things like that, but other than that, and manager only ones because they're coming to hear about a manager, we open all our sessions up to anybody now, and that's also the more recent group I set up called Pause for Support, which is a 6-weekly group. Anyone who wants to come together to talk about menopause and any topic related to menopause can do so, and then we break into groups virtually for them to talk about what they want to, their lived experience or otherwise. So always good to be as inclusive as you can.
Yeah, in fact, and it's really interesting to hear some of the parallels, because we do something similar called Menopause Cuppers, which are now, you know, open forum, anyone to join. And it was really interesting because we did a session recently for a team internally that happened to be mostly men as well, and there was a lot of fear going into it from the people that had organised it, actually, as to, you know, what was the response going to be? Is it going to be brought up as, you know, how's it going to work? And there was some really, really engaging discussion, and from you know, all age ranges, about people, you know, mothers, partners, whoever, right? And it really engaged in the discussion, and it really highlighted how poor, frankly, kind of understanding of menopause is across society. And so I guess moving on then, have you found that those sessions naturally started the conversation, or did you find that there are other things that you needed to do to kind of start conversations within the workplace around it?
I think they did start conversation, there's no doubt about that, but I think this is probably where I come back to one of my biggest challenges, which is, as a big organisation, it takes a long time to get the conversation going throughout your whole organisation. So, you know, I'm nearly 3 years in October this year to our journey, and there are still lots of colleagues in my organisation who do not know we support menopause in the workplace, and it seems staggering, you know, and it breaks my heart, actually, but it's, you know, it's because we can't talk about menopause every day. Not everybody wants us to, and neither would I, but you know, there's lots of things going on in organisations every day, you know, and that's just the people agenda, let alone the business agenda and everything else. So you have to pick when you communicate really carefully, you know. So I do pick things like National Mental Health Week, International Women's Day, you know. I pick and choose moments throughout the year where I communicate to the whole workforce, but that's where I bring my advocates in now. So I've trained about 25 colleagues across the business who are passionate about menopause, as I am. They've been trained to deliver short awareness sessions to managers and colleagues around menopause. That did have a budget attached to it, not significant actually, but that did have a budget attached to it. But that's meant that in an organisation of 20,000 colleagues, whenever, as Amantha said, I do a communication about it, I can rely on them to amplify that and share that across their part of the business, as well as all of my people networks that cover probably a huge proportion of our population. Yeah. So I think that that's the challenge, is getting the word out there in different ways. But, you know, I will get an email saying, the colleague here is asking, do we do menopause support? It's like, yes, you know, let me show you straight away where it is. So it does take time. It really does.
And that's really interesting, because there are a couple of questions that have come in on similar themes around, in those sessions, would you avoid conversations around potential treatments and direct people towards what is available? And then as a follow-on from that, did you have to change what was available when you kind of at the beginning of the journey?
Yeah, so I'm very clear. You know, I did those awareness sessions, but I'm not a medical professional. You know, and in any sessions I do now in the organisation, they are always awareness sessions. So they carry a video with facts, which is great, because it's a great way of imparting the facts around menopause. And then we have a conversation about it with whoever the audience is, and that's always the richest part of the discussion, really. And you know, and that's why, you know, Amantha delivered some facts in a few minutes, and they are really important to hear. And then you can have the conversation. So I think that's one of the things. And I think that I guess the other thing for me would be that it's about how do you engage people with that information and give it to them when they need it as easy as they can get it? But actually, how do you make sure, as you said, they find the information they need in the right way? So we now do bring in experts, medical experts sometimes, who will give expert webinars, whether it might be on HRT or it might be on stress and resilience for menopause. But whenever I'm working on it with my team or my advocates, we're very clear that we're not there to provide advice or any medical information. We might give some facts around the medical side of things, but you know, we are much more talking about the awareness. Why are we talking about it? Why is it important? What can you do to help yourself, and what can we do to help you as an employer?
Yeah, and I think there's so many parallels here to, you know, any part of health and well-being, right? And when we're talking mental health, whatever, we tend not to have trained professionals within the organisation, or you might have a trained mental health first aider or someone like that, but we tend not to give out advice, do we? But we kind of go, this is the direct, you know, this is what's available, and have you considered this? Which is always, you know, seems to go down well, and the best way to do it. So Amantha, a couple of questions for you, I think. There's a really interesting one here around, is there a danger that the more we talk about this, and if we bring too many people's attention to some of the difficulties, that we then start to introduce bias in both in the workplace and recruitment? Because as we've kind of covered, education is pretty poor. So actually at the moment, there's a lot of people that don't understand how difficult it is. So I guess, is there a risk of kind of bias creeping in if we talk about it too much?
Massively, Andrew, massively. And that's why we need to have these conversations, because, you know, if we really are embracing, you know, DEI in terms of our culture, having that diversity, that richness of talent, we need women and those with female hormones to actually be in the workplace. We already know that so many women have stepped away at really a time in their lives where they are at the top of their game. They've got all the skills and experience. I mean, one of the figures that I just wanted to say, if someone like myself were to leave your organisation today, it would be in an instant £30,000 loss to your business today. What it would also mean is it would take on average 29 weeks for my replacement to get up to speed and be as effective as I might have been. I mean, it's just unthinkable. You know, the reality is our economists have already done the number crunching. Our pot of money will not support an ageing female population. It just won't. We need to be at work, and for a small amount of adjustment, and that's what we're talking about here. I hear the frustration, and I've seen it in the chat. Why are we just talking about menopause? What about, you know, fertility issues? What about miscarriage? What I want you to know is, I think this is the tip of the iceberg. The government's women health strategy is going to ask us to look at all of it. So please, please, I'm on the same side as you. This is about making all health issues important, but we're starting somewhere. And I think menopause is a real powerhouse of a place to start, because if 1 million women have left, that is a real signpost that we need to do something about it. So I hear those frustrations, but what I would say to you is this. I know that if you got me into your business now as a 50-year-old perimenopausal woman, I'm going to do amazing things for you in your business. That's why I'm here. So I'm the face of menopause. I'm advocating for all menopausal women. Keep us in work. You will absolutely get the best out of us.
I have no doubts you would. And it's really interesting, right? Because one of the questions that was coming out was, how do you convince senior leadership that there is return on investment from this? And I think, Amantha, I mean, you've covered that, right? It's part of what you've just said. You immediately lose 30 grand as a business from someone leaving. Then you have the time effect of trying to get someone up to speed. It's a massive loss to the business.
If you add to that there are, you know, another 2 or 3 women in 4 that are in work and suffering symptoms every day and suffering presenteeism, and actually by giving a few small adjustments and talking about it, you can make a massive difference to those in the workplace thriving at work. Then it's an enormous case. It's not just the absence or the attrition, it's about the women in work that aren't actually surviving very well.
And there's another follow-on from this, and I'll leave it up to whichever one of you would prefer to tackle this one, because it's a really interesting question, right? Kind of covers policy and it covers health and well-being in general. I guess the question is, why menopause? Why draw out the menopause? Why not have a policy which is just, we're going to support, or guidelines around, we're going to support anyone going through anything challenging whilst they're at work? So why Why draw out menopause specifically in this way?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think there has to be an overarching principle for organisations that if you care about your employees, then that's what you've just said. Actually, maybe that overarching principle is that we know an individual comes to work, we will help you in any way we can as an employer to be your best self at work and to deliver your best work. But I think having that approach doesn't necessarily then enable you to kind of target in certain directions where you place that support, does it? So I think that from a menopause point of view, I guess my answer would be we haven't talked about it. We are talking about it now and have been for several years, but for millennia we haven't talked about the impacts of it, and we've ignored it, and it's been a taboo. And so as with all of those things, fertility is the same, by the way. We need to talk about it first. I'd love to be in a position where we don't need to do that, and we don't need to have something separate about menopause all the time, because it's already there. But it's with all of the topics that have become taboo and are now starting to be talked about more, including mental health, that actually mean that we then get to a point where we don't need to do that. So I think for those that challenge me and say things like why do we not promote this kind of health area more, we're now starting to talk more broadly about women's health. But as Amantha said, if you start somewhere, it kind of then starts to build on itself, and people start to understand the importance of actually, do you know what? There are a lot of things around fertility. Again, that's a male issue as much as a female issue, and you have colleagues at work who aren't talking about baby loss when actually they're a man and a woman. And how do you engage that conversation, and how do you talk about that openly? So I think it's about just having some principles to support that ethos that you want as an employer.
I really
can I just add also as well, Andrew, I think publicly we are much more aware that the number of employment tribunals that are presenting with specific menopause cases, and I think not that I would want that to be the incentive, but I would want that to always be something in our minds, which is the reality is if you can demonstrate that you have and are making reasonable adjustments for people, that protects your reputation, because we all know that bad news travels faster than good news. And if we want to keep attracting the right talent to our business, if we want to get people like me to be interested in working in your organisation, the reality is we need to be presenting outwardly that we are committed to looking after people. But I am passionate about, from birth to death, women are affected by their hormones, and it's just a matter of how that pops up. So just get started on something. It just means you can then build in those other things as and when that you're able to. But yeah, it's a really good question.
I think they're fantastic answers, right? I think it highlights the policy conversation as well, because it kind of, the risk is that you end up with policies for everything, which is I think what most employers are trying to avoid, right? Because there's a lot of admin and bureaucracy that goes into writing some of those things. The fundamental point, from my perspective at least, is people want to work in a diverse and inclusive workplace. That's what all the stats tell us. If we start the conversation, you've got to start somewhere, right? And if you start the conversation, it will naturally flow and build. But if you don't start the conversation, it's never going to go anywhere, right? So I guess there are a couple of questions here, real nice specific ones, but I really like them. So I guess in terms of the survey that you sent out, Teresa, at the beginning, did you send that to both men and women? Was it purely focused to your female colleagues at the beginning?
Yeah, I did see this question. I think a couple of parts. So the answer is that we sent it to for individuals going through who thought they maybe or knew they were going through menopause to answer. But we communicated it as part of an internet communication to our whole organisation with our launch of menopause support. So everyone knew we were doing it, and it was part of a whole suite of information that we provided. So it's just part of that. We did ask a question in there about what do managers need to support colleagues going through menopause. So it wasn't just that, but we were asking questions around, have you had absence in the last 12 months? What are your most common symptoms? Because it was about trying to understand the lived experience. So I think that was right at the time. The survey we did 2 years later, last year, was open to all colleagues. And we asked some similar questions, but we also had questions in there for others, just around what were their levels of knowledge of the support that we had in place, to sort of see if people were starting to understand that we did support menopause now.
Okay. And Amantha, I'm going to direct this one to you. There's a couple of questions here on the male menopause and how do we include male menopause in the discussion? Is there any real evidence of truth that men can also have some symptoms of the menopause? So I thought that was probably a good one for you to tackle, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, brilliant. I was having this conversation with my dentist yesterday, which was fantastic because he knows I'm always talking about it. And here's the really interesting thing: the andropause, which is what we call male menopause, is a thing, and Mother Nature has had a really big old laugh at our expense, because the main sex hormone that works in a man and a woman's brain is actually estrogen, and testosterone is converted to estrogen. So as men age, their testosterone levels decline. So andropause absolutely is a thing. And when I do webinars in businesses, I have a lot of fantastic questions from the male cohort about, okay, how does that affect me? Because a lot of the symptoms are very similar. So I think, like Teresa said, if you are inclusive and you open it up and you're constantly talking about it, you start to get that interest. And some of the crossover things are the same. You know, lifestyle, I talk about lifestyle, how that can impact, how your sleep impacts. So these are universal concepts that will help men, women, transgender, you know, so it opens up this richness in this conversation then that goes, okay, so this is also could be happening to me. And I think that, again, I don't know, Andrew, you're a guy. You tell us, would that draw you in if you sort of thought, okay, maybe that's something I should take an interest in?
Of course it would. I mean, I'm here as an ally, right? So I clearly have, I'm interested in the conversations anyway. And I think that's where all of this goes. I think, anything... we're probably all here because we really value inclusivity in the workplace and health and well-being and understanding, right? So I think that anything that addresses those topics, I think, is fundamental to me. So, okay. So
Andrew, may I just add one last thing, which is only because I think if people wanted to do one thing today and to include on your survey, ask how they would like menopause to be documented on their absence system, because that is one of the quickest wins you will get. If you can actually just put a tab, menopause related, you're going to start to help get a better window on your numbers. And it dials down the fear for people. It says, okay, the organisation is paying attention. So take a look at your reporting policies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what we've done. We've recently added, menopause as a reason for absence in the system, and I think it's helped. I mean, by the sounds of things, it's massively helped. So I think that's fantastic. So a couple of other questions around. Okay, so if we try and circle up everything that we've been discussing, right? For companies who are very much at the beginning of their journey, whether they're large, SMEs, whatever, two strands. What should the first thing that they think about be? And then as a follow-on, are there quick wins that they can put in place that will help immediately?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think very briefly, I'm conscious of time. So if you haven't done anything at all yet, have a think about your numbers. That might be, if you're really small, that might be really easy to do, but just look at the numbers. How many women do you have in the workplace? What's the age range? How many men do you have as managers? What do the stats look like? And then, I would honestly start with talk to your employees about what they want. And you can do it so easily. We all know now you can do easily online surveys, and they're anonymized. I'm more than happy to share the 5 questions we did in our first survey. They were super simple, but keep it short. But it shows that you're interested in understanding the experience, and don't make assumptions around that. We started with a few awareness sessions, but where are we? We're now June, and October will be World Menopause Day, and my advice is take some time to look at what the case is in your organisation, look at your figures, think about getting some input from colleagues and employees and managers around what do they need, what do they know, look at what's out there. There's some amazing support out there, and think about, even if it's not before, starting your discussions for World Menopause Day. You can start easily tomorrow, but think about it first, about what you want to achieve. And there are lots of people out there that can help you to do that as well. And I'm more than happy to sort of be part of that. So I think it's looking at what you can do first. Think about what you want to say. That's the most important thing. Where do you want your support to sit? What do you want to say about menopause? And who might be able to help you? You'll have people within your organisation that will be there already that you don't know, that will want to help you to do this.
Fantastic. So we're going to run one last poll, if that's okay. So who do you think should be responsible for addressing menopause in the workplace? Not going to lie, that's probably a little bit of a loaded question, but it will be really interesting after you've heard the discussion what you think. So we'll give another kind of 10 seconds for people to answer. Right, David, do you want to flash up the results? There we go. That's what we all wanted to see. So 85% all of the above is what's coming out. And I think that's, I think that's the reality of what we've been highlighting. The whole, if the importance is in having conversations around it, and anyone can engage in the conversation, and the more people we get to engage, the better, the more naturally the conversation will evolve anyway. So I think that's fantastic. So I think, David, shall I hand back to you for closing words?
Sounds good, Andrew. And may I say thank you, Teresa, Amanda, Andrew. Brilliant session. Literally could go on for a couple more hours. So thank you so much. All of those still with us, we'll be sending a resource pack following the webinar, and there'll be a recording of the webinar that you can refer to if you want to direct colleagues to. I'll include that on the follow-on email. And as with anything to do with the Chamber and our mental wellbeing charter, please let me know if you would like to find out a bit more information, if you would like to sign up for it, and if you would like to get more involved in our mental wellbeing community, we would love to have you along for the ride. And we look forward to future sessions. I can't see us stopping this topic either. I think it's got so much passion behind it. And again, thank you to our panelists and for all our wonderful audience. And I think we'll leave it there and let you get on with your day. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
So